So, however long ago you've written down your dreams, it can still come to pass.
We may look different and live in different countries, yet our stories are knitted with the same threads of excitement, uncertainties, challenges, and victories. As we journey through the ups and downs of life, it is our undeniable will and God's strength that propel us to joy after pain, smile after frowns, and ups after downs. We were born to win. We were destined to greatness. We are overcomers. Welcome to God Scoops, raw and unedited stories. Welcome to Raw and Unedited Stories, the place where stories are told to uplift, encourage, and to brighten your day. I know a number of you have subscribed to our channel. We just want to thank you for that. And for those who have not, now is the time to do so. Remember to click the notification bell, write a comment in the comment section so we can know what you're thinking. And today we have Jermaine with us to share his story. Welcome, Jermaine, to Raw and Unedited Stories.
Yes.
Great to have you.
My
Now,
pleasure.
before you begin to talk to us about your story, just tell us where you're from.
Um, I grew up, I spent my formative years in Augustown in St. Andrew, just below the University of the West Indies. And I grew up in Portmore, St. Catherine. And I think of myself as a pilgrim and a sojourner. I studied at Brown University in Rhode Island, and I taught at the University of the West Indies for 10 years, and now I'm teaching in New Jersey and living in New York City.
Right. So, Portmore, what country is Portmore for those who live in Germany?
So Portmore is a southeast part of St. Catherine. St. Catherine is one of the largest parishes in Jamaica. Portmore is approximately 22 minutes from the city center, from Kingston, the capital of Jamaica. And it's if you ever fly into Kingston, it's the last approach before you land at the Norman Manley International Airport. You are overlooking Portmore, St. Catherine.
Awesome. Awesome. Interesting information. Thank you for that because I
Sure.
did not know that. All right. Now, begin to tell our audience your story.
You know, I love the gospel song. This is my story. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. My story starts in Augustown. I grew up on the banks, I love to tell people, of the Hope River. So I was always very close to Hope. I grew up on the banks of the Hope River in St. Andrew. And I always thought of myself as a dreamer. My whole life I've been told that I love to dream. I'm always dreaming and I'm always writing them down. And I never understood the power of dreams until I began to actually achieve what I wrote down. And I'll give you one of the more interesting ones. When I was 13 or 14, I became a Christian. And so it just got to me that I should write all these degrees behind my name. And I remember some of my friends laughed. They're like, we haven't even completed high school. What are you talking about, these degrees? And I wrote these degrees behind my name, and I got to immerse myself in the scriptures, and I read about Joseph. And I realized that he dreamt a dream, the Bible tells us in Genesis. And he was 17 when he dreamt that dream, and that dream didn't come to pass until 21 years later. So however long ago you've written down your dreams, it can still come to pass. And so I wrote these degrees behind my name at 14, and I achieved all four of the degrees I wrote behind my name by age 27. So I have a bachelor's, 2 masters, and a PhD. I'm saying that not to declare that I'm the smartest person in the room. I'm saying that to declare that your dreams are valid. And if you entrust them to God, he can bring them to pass. I didn't even know what I was doing. I wrote these degrees. I didn't even write them in any particular order. I just wrote the degrees. And I had MD, I had PhD, I had BTH, I had so many degrees behind my name. But God was doing a work of destiny. And sometimes I'm reminded of the prophet Zechariah. He says, "Dost thou despise the day of small beginnings?" Right? And so we shouldn't despise the day of small beginnings. So my story, small, very small beginning, humble family, growing up on the banks of the Hope River, but always dreaming for something greater than I saw around me. And God has led me to fulfilling most of them, and there's still more, and a long way to go.
So tell us about your story in Augustown as a boy growing up. What were some of your experiences?
My very good friend, who is a mutual friend of Patricia, we grew up together. I've known her now for 42 years. Her grandmother was my godmother. And all I could remember is that there was a simplicity of the time. It's funny because so many communities in Jamaica and around the world, around the US, are stigmatized because of their socioeconomic reality. And so if you were to think like Nathaniel in Jesus's day, he asked the question, can anything good come from Nazareth? And persons have asked that question, maybe rhetorically or silently, can anything good come from Augustown? Well, myself, Avril, and so many others, we were dreamers who came from Augustown, not the best place. Grew up in between bouts of violence and, social decay. And poor people, but they were proud people. They were industrious people. They were happy people. And so we didn't think of ourselves as poor simply because we didn't have X or Y or Z. We thought of contentment. And so I grew up with that perspective of contentment. And so for me, Augustown starts the story, but there's no Dr. Jermaine McAlpin without Augustown. And so for me, Augustown becomes the launching pad for the rest of my life.
Phenomenal. That is phenomenal. And it doesn't matter where we are coming from, it's where we are going.
Absolutely.
And for those who don't know about Augustown, you have already talked about the volatile experiences and so on. Give us some more nitty-gritty details of some of the experiences you had as a boy.
I grew up in a community where everyone looked out for each other. You would see even the men on the corner, right? A far cry from maybe the reality of today. Everyone looked out for each other. So everyone knew who my mother was. She was affectionately called Auntie B, right? My godmother, Avril's grandmother, her shop was right by the bus terminus. At 3 years old, I was able to board that bus at the terminus, and that bus would take me a distance of about 3.5 miles to what we'd call kindergarten, right? But everyone knew me. Everyone knew what stop I would come off, and there was someone there waiting for me. This is before cell phones, right? So there was no one to call to say, well, expect Jermaine to come off at X time. Life was simple. It was more predictable. You lived in circumstances where people had to hustle and to struggle, but everyone was a community. Everyone knew who I was, and so people looked out for my welfare, even as a child. So I spent the first 6 to 7 years of my life in Augustown, and I continued to have family there. So I continued to have a connection to that, what I call the place of origin, because it was Augustown that deposited this idea of dreaming bigger than your circumstances.
Yes, and I hear you talk about happiness. I hear you talk about simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear you talk about dreaming. And so many people think that they grew up in a ghetto environment and there's no hope. And then they have to turn to violence and they
Mm-hmm.
have to turn to drugs and so on. But you chose a different pathway. And what was it about you that caused you to choose that pathway and not the pathway of crime?
I think part of the challenge is when we stigmatize and stereotype communities, we assume that because people live in an era that is considered volatile, then everyone is concerned with violence and are violence producers. On the contrary, those tend to be in the minority. In Augustown, they were the minority, right? You had people who were poor, but they were not only humble, they were hardworking and they were striving. So I saw that hardworking nature. I saw my mother, who was a supervisor at a garment factory, who would work long hours, right? I saw my father, who worked at the National Stadium. He would work for long hours. I saw the people around me. My cousin was a nurse. She worked at the Cancer Institute just up the road from where we lived. I saw people going to work at the University of the West Indies or the University Hospital of the West Indies. So though they were poor, they confirmed to me that you can be poor and still be industrious. You can be poor and still be striving for greater, because poverty is simply your present circumstances. It does not have to be your future circumstance.
Awesome. And I recently watched a documentary about Augustown,
Mm-hmm.
and I see where the people came together and fought against crime. And to date, Augustown is one of the most peaceful place to live. And the support that the community leaders are implementing are helping so many young people. And I'm glad for your story because it is telling us that there's hope.
Mm-hmm.
There's hope amidst all the struggles and the poverty that people go through. We don't have to um, we don't have to take a life of crime.
Right.
We don't have to do that. We can decide to dream big, and that's what you did. Now, how did you get out of Augustown and to America to become a professor and all of that? Let's talk
Well,
about that.
well, I think it's also important to not discount that there are challenges in these communities, right? Um, and so there are challenges. Um, I recall a story my mother told me years ago that in maybe one of the most volatile or violent elections in Jamaica's political history, the general elections of October 1980, someone came into the yard, a gunman, and he hid in the house. And my mom would often say that it was at that point she decided and she realized that she had to give her sons, because uh, I'm one of five children. My mother now departed, but I'm one of five children. I'm the fourth child, but the older of the two sons. And so she said she wanted to give us and provide for us opportunities beyond what our current reality was. So she was a dreamer herself, and at the time, the National Housing Trust, the public entity that builds affordable housing across Jamaica, was developing housing schemes in St. Catherine, in the area Portmore, just outside of Spanish Town. And she took the bus from Augustown down to the NHT in New Kingston, and she signed papers, not knowing how it would work out. And in 1983, it began to come through. And in April 1984, I moved to Portmore, St. Catherine. So you're talking a distance of maybe about 15 or so miles from Augustown to Portmore.
Mhm.
And that journey seemed like an eternity because I'd never gone to Portmore prior to moving there. And I went to the micro practicing all age school in Kingston, Avril and myself. And then I went to Calabar High School, and from there, the University of the West Indies. Um, it was at the University of the West Indies I began to walk even more closely into the dream. A professor challenged me because he said, no one has gotten a first class honors, which would be the highest honors at the university. No one has gotten a first class honors in political science. And I remember when he said that, the next words to myself were, I am going to get a first class honors in political science and international relations. And 3 years later, I did. But most times when we tell stories, we leave out the non glamorous parts. There
Mhm.
were long nights, sleepless nights, um, nights writing out notes because I didn't have the money to photocopy books. This is a pre-internet era, so there was no internet to get information from. I had to be in the library transcribing notes, and I had to study those notes because I had to know them like it was the book. And so through that, I learned the discipline of studying. Um, the scripture, Paul writing to Timothy says, study to show thyself approved, a workman that needn't be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And so I took it to heart that if you want to be great, you have to be a student. You're a lifelong student. Anyone that wants to be great has to be a student, a lifelong learner. And so that was what I did. I studied. And then after I got the first class honors and I got the master's, I decided, I really want to do a PhD. And I remember a person saying, "But you're going to be a professional student. You're just going to study so your whole life." And I felt a little discouraged, but I continued. And then a lecturer of mine, she saw a scholarship and she said, "But you'd be great for this." But she's like, "But it's due tomorrow." So we're talking, this was a Thursday and the scholarship application was due the Friday. And God worked it out that I was able to get all the material in. I was provisionally considered. I got an interview, maybe the first and only person to have gotten the interview without having done the GRE, which was the graduate exam. And God worked it out. I got the Fulbright graduate scholarship from Jamaica. And I did 1 year at Florida International University, and then I transferred to Brown University, and I completed my PhD there in political science and African politics. And so for me, I knew it was destiny because God had already revealed to me from I was 14, writing these degrees behind my name. I knew this was destiny. You didn't always feel like you were strong or that you would achieve it, but the goal is to persevere. One of my pastors told me very early, be relentless in your pursuit of excellence. Doesn't mean that you're not going to falter. Doesn't mean that you're not going to have bumps in the road. Doesn't mean that you're not going to have detours, because I'll tell you the biggest detour. For most of my life, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. And when I got to university and I didn't get into law, a true but funny story is that they didn't have any application evidence that I applied because my application was lost. And so while everyone else was getting into college, they had no application for me. And I persevered. I waited for long hours to see the admissions officer. And he said, "I'll give you political science." And I was like, what am I going to do with political science? And the testimony is true. Today, I have 4 degrees in political science and international relations.
Well, Jermaine, congratulations.
Thank you.
And for the little boy who still live in Augustown, or maybe Rema, or any other valley
Or
town,
East New York, or wherever he lives.
right? And he said, "Okay, I can't do that. I don't have a
Yes,
support
you
from
can.
family. I don't have support from family. And how am I going to get food while I'm going to pay my school student loan and et cetera, et cetera." Talk to us about how, as that little boy, how did you get through that?
So every dream has to have not just a dreamer, but also co-dreamers or dream partners. My mother did everything in her powers, worked long hours. My sisters, who were older than I, was my church family. They were instrumental in putting me on this path. And so your circumstance may not be identical to mine, but find someone that can be a dream partner. Don't find a dream killer. Some people you can't invest your dream or entrust it to them because they will kill it. Can you imagine if at 14 I'd had these degrees behind my name and I said to my mother, "Mommy, this is what I want to do." And she said, "Boy, go sit on one side. We don't have any money to do that." But she said, "Yes, my son, you can do it." We didn't have the means to do it. But that is what faith is. Faith is ensuring that you entrust an uncertain future to a certain God. That's faith, right? That's what I had to do. I had to take student loans. I had to pay them off when I was done. I had to suffer the embarrassment one semester because they held on to my exam card. I couldn't do exam until I paid the fee. Guess what the fee was? It was pennies on the dollar, but that was the balance left after student loan paid. I got bursaries. I did the work to get scholarships. So if you know you're poor, don't be dunce and poor. Be bright and poor, right? Think of education as the vehicle to advancement. I tell my mentees all the time, they can repossess a house, they can repossess a car, they can repossess property. your wife can even leave you. But when you have education, no one can repossess what you've learned. No one can come back and ask you for the knowledge you've acquired in the school of hard knocks or in the university or the high school that you learned. And so I tell someone who is struggling and saying, look, I don't have any way out. You do. Trust God that you will find a way out, and also work while you are trusting. Most of us trust and stay still. Unless God gives you that command, faith means moving forward. Abraham, by faith, left Ur of the Chaldees and he journeyed. He didn't stop. Lot pitched a tent in this beautiful place that was beautiful to the eyes to behold, but beneath that beauty was things that were sinful and offensive to God. And Abraham chose the plains of adversity, but he was better off for it. And so I'm encouraging someone that because it is difficult, it doesn't mean that you should stop. I didn't know snow, and I had to walk through a foot of snow, 3 o'clock in the morning, going from the library to my apartment in Rhode Island. This is an island boy, literally never experienced snow until I got to Rhode Island to do my PhD, and I had to persevere. So you have to dream, but you also have to be willing to suffer because of your dream. Again, that story is clear from Joseph. He suffered, so he had to go to the pit, from the pit to the prison, right?
Yes.
And so many of us want the thing, but we don't want it as bad. Imagine getting a dream and he must have said, well, is this dream going to come to pass? The butler left him in there, right? Potiphar's wife told lies on him. And in all of that, God was still working for his good. So much so that he could tell his brothers that what you meant for evil, God meant for good. So there are going to be some lessons and some tough lessons along the way that will make us think that God is against us. But what he's doing is that he's prepping us for the finishing of our story, right? I think of Jeremiah 18. Jeremiah gets the vision to go down to the potter's house. The pot can't tell the potter how to make it, right? The clay can't tell the potter how to make it. And so we have to be willing to trust God and leave the details up to him. I had dream partners along the way, someone who simply believed in my dream. And that was all I needed. Even if there were also dream killers, people who would say, but you're going to study your entire life? And I'll give you a very, very interesting story. When I got to completing my PhD, I taught at Brown for a year, and then I said I wanted to go back to my home, my paradise, my island home, to give back. And I taught at UWI for 10 years. And this is how the circle of life happens. My 7th grade teacher, as we'd say in Jamaica, my first form, my 7th grade English teacher, as life would have it, she came to my department to do her PhD. Now, can you imagine that circle? My 7th grade teacher was now going to be a grad student in the department I was teaching at.
Amazing.
God will bring things full circle if you really only trust him.
Amazing persistency, consistency, amazing resilience, amazing. Talk to us about your book. That's another achievement we want to hear about.
It's funny. I was telling Gary earlier that God has given me an involuntary ministry. I say involuntary because I wouldn't have signed up for it. But in the last 5 or 6 years, I had to journey to many hospitals. I had to go to nursing homes or visit people in their homes or be there for family and friends who had lost loved ones. And I kept on wondering, what was this working up to? And then on January 13th, 2019, my mother died. And I realized that all of this was preparatory so that I could internalize these lessons I was going through to help me deal with grief. But the most shocking thing about when my mother died, and it's something that is sometimes difficult to relay, but I will relate. I went to the hospital. It was a Sunday. I was getting ready for church. and I got the call that she passed, and so everything changed. And I was at the hospital waiting for them to pronounce my mother dead because she had passed at my sister's house. And all I heard God say is that whatever I'm going to give you is not to privatize your pain, but it is to publicize it so someone else can be blessed. And I'll tell you what my response was. I said, God, my mother just did, and you want to give me lessons now? That was what I said in my humanity. But what he was preparing me for was to write. And so I began to write. I'm always a writer. I write everything down. The notes section of my phone has about 1,600 notes. I write everything down. Every lecture, every sermon, everything, every poem, everything is there. And so I began to write. But he gave me the title of the book, the first book, because I'll tell you about the second one that is just now out. He gave me the title, Sown in Tears, taken from Psalm 125. And he says, for those who sow in tears will reap a harvest of joy, and they will come rejoicing, right? That's where we get the song, bringing in the sheaves. But first they have to sow in tears. Mm-hmm. And so the first book is called Sown in Tears, Reflections on Grief and Loss. And so since then, it's almost like voluntary ministry. I've had to talk so many times about grief. I've had to expand and expound on grief to let people understand that grief is not just the loss of a loved one. It can be the loss of a relationship. We grieve the loss of a job. We grieve the loss of our health. And so grief, if we are to be honest and open, most of the grieving we will do is not for someone who has died. Mm-hmm. You grieve over your children, right? Mm-hmm. You grieve over their choices and their behaviors, their mannerisms. You grieve over a marriage, over a friendship, over a relationship, over kinship, over a job, over a promotion. We grieve, and life is so much about grief, and it's not what I call dying grief, meaning someone has died and we're grieving them. It's living grief, that we are dealing with things that have ended even while we continue to live. And so Sown in Tears was written, and then the second book is now on pre-order and will be released on all platforms mid-February. But for pre-order purposes, for me to sign with my bad handwriting, it's being pre-ordered now, and it's called Holding Shadows: Understanding and Managing Grief's Complexity. Because grief is complex. Grief is not one thing. It's actually griefs, right? Several types of grief. Mm. And this second book, Holding Shadows, just throws the gate wide open that we have so many types of griefs.
Yes. Jermaine, I thank you for sharing such a phenomenal story. And I know so many people from grassroots to the palace will benefit from this story. And we will definitely ask you to come back to talk about grief, because so many people are suffering grief since 2019.
Yes.
Has not stopped. So, my dear, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
And Unedited Stories, and to our listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in today to Raw and Unedited Stories. And if you have a story to share, leave your information in the description and we will reach out to you. And remember to subscribe, like, and share. Yes. Have yourself a phenomenal day.
Amen.